The blood-red sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Brownsville, Texas, as Hannah Zimmerman stumbled from the back door of the Silver Dollar Saloon, her shoulders aching from 16 straight hours of scrubbing floors, washing dishes, and serving drinks to men who saw her as nothing more than part of the furniture. The year was 1885, and at 23, Hannah had already lived several lifetimes' worth of hardship, each day etched into the calluses that covered her once soft hands. Hannah paused to catch her breath in the alley behind the saloon, leaning against the rough wooden wall and closing her eyes against the relentless Texas heat. 4 years she'd been in Brownsville, 4 years of endless labor since her parents' farm had failed after the drought of '81. 4 years of sending what little money she could save to her younger siblings back east with their aunt. 4 years of hands that cracked and bled and never quite healed. "Miss, are you all right?" A deep voice startled Hannah from her momentary rest. She straightened quickly, smoothing her plain brown work dress. "Yes, sir, just catching my breath." The man before her sat atop a dappled gray horse, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. Dust covered his leather vest and denim pants, marking him as someone who'd spent considerable time on the trail. Not one of the local townsfolk, then. "Didn't mean to startle you, madam," he said, dismounting with an easy grace that spoke of years in the saddle. "Name's Thomas Sutton. Friends call me Tucker." Hannah nodded politely but remained guarded. Strange men and their attention rarely meant anything good for a working woman in a border town. "Hannah Zimmerman. Pleasure, Miss Zimmerman." He removed his hat, revealing tousled brown hair and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. "Just rode into town, looking for a place that might serve a decent meal and maybe some information about work in these parts." Despite her wariness, Hannah found herself pointing down the street. "Martha's boarding house serves the best food in town. As for work, depends on what you can do." Tucker smiled, a genuine expression that seemed to light his weathered face. "Much obliged. I can do most anything with horses and cattle. Spent the last 5 years working ranches up and down the Rio Grande." Hannah was about to respond when the back door of the saloon banged open, and Virgil, the owner, stuck his head out. "Girl, break's over. Got a spill needs cleaning and customers waiting." His bloodshot eyes narrowed when he noticed Tucker. "This one bothering you?" "No, sir," Hannah said quickly. "Just giving directions," Virgil grunted. "Well, get inside. You're not paid to socialize." Tucker's jaw tightened slightly, but he kept his tone easy. "My fault entirely, sir. Just asking for recommendations." As Hannah moved toward the door, Tucker called after her, "Thank you for your help, Miss Zimmerman." She nodded without looking back, disappearing into the noisy saloon, wondering why the cowboy's kind eyes stayed in her thoughts as she returned to her endless work. The next morning dawned hot and harsh, the summer sun already blazing by the time Hannah made her way to the well in the town square. Her arms ached as she worked the pump handle, filling her bucket with water for the day's cleaning. The Silver Dollar never truly closed. Men drank through the night, slept in the corners or on the tables, and by morning, the place was a disaster of spilled whiskey, tobacco juice, and worse things Hannah tried not to think about as she scrubbed. "Allow me," came a now familiar voice as strong hands took over the pump handle. Tucker Sutton had appeared beside her, his sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned, muscular forearms. "I can manage," Hannah said, though in truth, her shoulders burned from yesterday's exertions. "No doubt," Tucker replied with a smile, "but my mama taught me to help a lady whenever possible." Hannah almost laughed at being called a lady. 4 years of saloon work had stripped away such notions. She was a workhorse, nothing more. "Thank you," she conceded, stepping back as he filled her bucket with swift, easy strokes of the pump. "You're up early," he observed. "Never really went to sleep," Hannah admitted. "Saturday nights are busy. Cleaning goes till dawn, then it's time to start preparing for Sunday." Tucker frowned. "You work Sundays too?" "Every day," Hannah said matter-of-factly. "Virgil says the Lord made the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh, but the devil works all 7, so the saloon has to stay open." A look of disapproval crossed Tucker's face, but he said nothing as he handed her the full bucket. "Heavy load." Hannah reached for it, but as their hands brushed in the exchange, Tucker paused, his eyes falling to her hands. Without warning, he gently turned her palm upward, examining the network of calluses, the cracked skin around her knuckles, the old burns from hot dishwater. Heat rushed to Hannah's face as she tried to pull away. "I should go." But Tucker held her hand with surprising gentleness. "How long have you been working like this?" The unexpected concern in his voice caught Hannah off guard. "Since I was 14, she admitted. "Farm work first, then the saloon these past 4 years." Tucker's thumb brushed lightly over her palm, sending an unexpected shiver up her arm. "9 years of labor written right here," he said softly. Hannah finally succeeded in pulling her hand away. "Mr. Sutton." "Tucker," he corrected. "Tucker, then. I appreciate your help with the water, but I have to get back before Virgil notices I'm gone too long." He nodded, picking up the heavy bucket before she could protest. "I'll walk with you." As they made their way down the dusty street, Hannah grew increasingly aware of the curious glances from early rising shopkeepers. No one walked alongside Hannah Zimmerman, especially not a tall, handsome cowboy carrying her water bucket. "Have you found work yet?" she asked, desperate to break the strange tension she felt. "Heading out to the Carson ranch this morning," Tucker replied. "Old man Carson's foreman was at Martha's last night. Says they need experienced hands for a cattle drive next month." "The Carson place is good," Hannah said with genuine approval. "Fair wages, decent food. Mr. Carson treats his men well." They reached the back door of the saloon and Tucker set down the bucket. "Perhaps I could call on you sometime, when you're not working." Hannah couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped her lips. "That would be never, Mr. Sutton." "Tucker," he reminded her again. "And everyone has some time off." "Not everyone," Hannah said firmly. "But thank you again for your help." Before he could respond, she picked up the bucket and slipped inside, trying to ignore the strange flutter in her chest as she closed the door on Tucker Sutton's earnest face. The next week passed in a blur of work for Hannah. Summer always brought more traffic through Brownsville, traders and travelers moving between Mexico and the American territories, ranchers coming to town for supplies, and drifters looking for work or trouble, often both. The saloon stayed packed from noon until the early hours of morning, and Hannah's hands grew ever more raw from the constant immersion in soapy water, the scrubbing of stubborn stains, the endless polishing of glasses. She thought of Tucker Sutton occasionally, wondering how he was faring at the Carson ranch, but pushed such idle thoughts aside. Men like him didn't stay interested in saloon girls for long, especially ones with hands like sandpaper and no time for courtship. It was Saturday again when Hannah heard his voice over the din of the crowded saloon. She was clearing a table of empty glasses when someone called her name. "Miss Zimmerman." She turned to find Tucker standing by the bar, looking far more cleaned up than he had a week ago. His hair was freshly cut, his shirt crisp despite the heat, and his smile just as warm as she remembered. "Mr. Sutton," she acknowledged with a quick nod, continuing to stack glasses onto her tray. "Tucker," he corrected yet again, stepping closer. "I've been hoping to see you." Hannah felt several pairs of eyes turn their way, including Virgil's suspicious glare from behind the bar. "I'm working, Mr. Sutton. I can see that," he said, undeterred. "I just wanted to tell you I got that job at Carson's. Been breaking horses all week." Despite herself, Hannah smiled slightly. "Congratulations." Tucker leaned against the table, lowering his voice. "Carson gives his men Sundays off after church. I was wondering if you might join me for a walk tomorrow afternoon." Before Hannah could respond, Virgil appeared at her side. "Girl, tables need clearing. You're not paid to gossip." Tucker straightened, extending his hand to Virgil. "Thomas Sutton, sir, just sharing some good news with Miss Zimmerman." Virgil ignored the outstretched hand. "Zimmerman works here every day, Cowboy. She doesn't have time for walks." Hannah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and something else, anger at being discussed, as if she weren't standing right there. "I believe that's for Miss Zimmerman to decide," Tucker said, his easy manner belied by a new tension in his shoulders. "Not when she's under my roof," Virgil countered. "I paid good money to buy out her contract, and she works till that debt's paid." Hannah saw confusion cross Tucker's face. "Contract? It's nothing," Hannah said quickly, giving Tucker a warning look. "Mr. Sutton was just leaving." Tucker didn't move, his eyes now fixed on Virgil. "What kind of contract?" Virgil smiled unpleasantly. "Girl's pa needed money to save his farm, borrowed against her labor. When he couldn't pay, I bought the paper. She works till it's paid off, simple as that." Tucker's expression darkened. "That's indentured servitude. It's illegal. Call it what you want," Virgil shrugged. "Judge Foster didn't have a problem with it. Now buy a drink or get out of my establishment." Hannah touched Tucker's arm lightly. "Please," she whispered, "don't make trouble." After a tense moment, Tucker nodded curtly. "Whiskey," he told Virgil, who smirked triumphantly before moving back to the bar. "You should go," Hannah said quietly as she finished loading her tray. "Virgil holds grudges." "How much?" Tucker asked, his voice tight. "What?" "How much is left on your contract?" Hannah shook her head. "It doesn't matter, I'll never pay it off. The interest keeps growing and he charges me for room and board." Tucker's jaw clenched. "That's not right." "It's life," Hannah replied with resignation. "My life, not yours." "Please don't involve yourself." Before he could respond, Virgil returned with a glass of whiskey, slamming it down on the table. 3 cents. Tucker placed a dime on the table. "Keep the change," he said coldly, then downed the whiskey in one swallow. To Hannah, he said quietly, "This isn't over." As he walked away, Hannah felt a mixture of gratitude for his concern and dread at what his interference might cost her. Men had challenged Virgil before. They either left town shortly after or suffered unfortunate accidents. Virgil had friends in high places, including Judge Foster and Sheriff Williams. She couldn't afford to hope that Tucker Sutton would be different. Hope was a luxury Hannah Zimmerman had surrendered long ago, along with any dreams of a life beyond the walls of the Silver Dollar Saloon. The following Wednesday, Hannah was hauling water from the well before dawn when she noticed a figure leaning against the pump. Her heart jumped as Tucker straightened and walked toward her. "You shouldn't be here," she said, glancing nervously around the deserted square. "Had to see you," Tucker replied. "Been thinking about your situation." Hannah shook her head. "I told you it's not your concern." "It became my concern the moment I saw how Virgil treats you," Tucker insisted. "I've been asking around town. You're not the only girl he's trapped this way." "Asking questions will only bring trouble," Hannah warned. "Virgil has powerful friends." Tucker stepped closer. "So do I. Carson's not just my employer, he's an old friend of my father's. When I told him about your situation, he was furious. Said he's been suspicious of Virgil's operation for years." Hope flickered in Hannah's chest before she ruthlessly extinguished it. Mr. Carson is a good man, but even he can't stand against Judge Foster. The judge owns half the businesses in town. Maybe not alone, Tucker agreed. But Carson sent for the federal marshal. Contract labor laws changed after the war. What Virgil's doing isn't just wrong, it's illegal. Hannah's eyes widened. A federal marshal, here, Tucker nodded, should arrive by week's end. In the meantime, Carson suggested something else. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded paper. He needs help at the ranch house. His wife's been ill, and they need someone to cook and clean. The pay is fair, and you'd have your own cabin. Hannah stared at the paper, which she now realized was a legitimate work contract. I can't just leave. Virgil would, Carson's sending men to escort you if you agree, Tucker interrupted. Tonight, after the saloon closes. Hannah's mind raced. My things. Pack what you can carry, leave the rest. Hannah bit her lip, years of caution warring with a desperate desire to escape. Why are you doing this? You barely know me. Tucker's expression softened. Because no one deserves to be treated as property, and because from the moment I saw you in that alley, I couldn't stop thinking about you. The sincerity in his voice made Hannah's chest tight. This is dangerous if it doesn't work. It will, Tucker assured her. Do you trust me? Hannah studied his face in the growing light of dawn, searching for any sign of deception. Finding none, she nodded slowly. Yes, God help me, I do. Then be ready at 3 in the morning. I'll be waiting with Carson's men in the alley. Hannah clutched the contract to her chest, hardly daring to believe this might be real. I will. The day passed in a fog of anticipation and terror. Hannah went through her tasks mechanically, jumping at every loud noise, certain that Virgil somehow knew of her plans. By evening, her nerves were so frayed that she dropped a tray of glasses, earning a vicious backhanded slap from Virgil that split her lip. Clumsy bitch, he snarled. That comes out of your pay. Hannah kept her eyes downcast as she cleaned up the shards, tasting blood and humiliation. The incident only strengthened her resolve to leave, no matter the risk. As the saloon finally emptied in the early hours of morning, Hannah slipped upstairs to the tiny room she shared with 2 other girls. Both were already asleep, exhausted from their night's work. Hannah had few possessions: 2 dresses, a faded photograph of her family, a small wooden cross that had been her mother's, and a few personal items. She wrapped everything in a shawl and waited, counting the minutes until the town clock struck 3. At the appointed time, Hannah crept down the back stairs, her heart thundering so loudly she was certain it would wake the entire building. The back door, always locked at night, presented her first obstacle. Weeks ago, she had carefully made an impression of the key and soap when Virgil had trusted her to lock up. Yesterday, she'd used her precious free minutes to have a duplicate made at the blacksmith's, claiming it was for a trunk she'd lost the key to. With trembling hands, Hannah inserted the key, holding her breath as it turned with a soft click. She eased the door open and slipped into the alley, where the promised figures waited in shadow. Hannah. Tucker's voice was barely audible as he stepped forward. Behind him stood 2 other men, both armed. I'm here, she whispered. Tucker took her bundle and passed it to one of the men, then helped Hannah onto a waiting horse. Can you ride? Not well, she admitted. You'll ride with me, Tucker decided, mounting behind her. Hold on. As they moved quietly through the sleeping town, Hannah felt as though she were dreaming. The cool night air on her face, the solid warmth of Tucker at her back, the rhythmic movement of the horse beneath them all seemed unreal after years confined to the saloon's smoky interior. They had just reached the edge of town when a shout broke the silence. Stop right there. Hannah turned to see Sheriff Williams emerging from between 2 buildings, his pistol drawn. Keep riding, Tucker muttered to his companions, slowing his own horse to face the sheriff. "That's Virgil's girl you've got there, Sutton," Williams called. "This looks an awful lot like theft of property to me." Tucker's arm tightened protectively around Hannah's waist. "She's not property, Sheriff. She's a free woman accepting legitimate employment with the Carson Ranch." Williams stepped closer, his gun still raised. "Got papers to prove that?" Hannah clutched the contract Tucker had given her, but before she could produce it, the sheriff continued. "Doesn't matter anyway. Girl's got a debt to pay. Judge Foster will have something to say about this." "I expect he will," Tucker agreed calmly. "Just as the federal marshal will have something to say about indentured servitude in a free state." Williams' eyes narrowed. "Federal marshal, arriving Friday," Tucker confirmed. "With specific interest in reviewing the contracts Judge Foster has been enforcing." The sheriff hesitated, clearly calculating his options. His loyalty to Virgil and the judge battled visibly with his instinct for self-preservation. "Carson's a powerful man, too," Tucker reminded him. "With friends in Austin and Washington. Which side of this do you want to be on when the dust settles, Sheriff?" Williams lowered his gun slightly. "Virgil won't let this stand." "That's his choice," Tucker said evenly. "But I'd suggest you decide where your true interests lie." After a long moment, Williams holstered his weapon. "I didn't see anything tonight," he said finally. "But you watch yourself, Sutton. Virgil plays rough." "So do I when necessary," Tucker replied. "Good night, Sheriff." As they rode away, Hannah released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "He'll tell Virgil." "Probably," Tucker agreed. "But by then you'll be safe at Carson's with legitimate employment and the protection of the law." Hannah leaned back against him, suddenly overwhelmed by exhaustion and relief. "Thank you," she whispered. Tucker's arms tightened around her. "Rest now. We've got a long ride ahead." Hannah closed her eyes, lulled by the steady rhythm of the horse and the solid presence at her back. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel something dangerously close to hope. The Carson Ranch sprawled across thousands of acres of rolling Texas grassland, dotted with mesquite trees and cut through by a creek that provided precious water for cattle and humans alike. The main house stood on a gentle rise, a well-built two-story structure surrounded by various outbuildings, corrals, and a bunkhouse for the ranch hands. By the time they arrived, the sun was just beginning to paint the eastern horizon with streaks of gold and pink. Hannah, who had dozed against Tucker's chest during the ride, straightened as they approached the house. "It's beautiful," she murmured, taking in the peaceful scene. "Wait until you meet Mrs. Carson," Tucker said. "She's been looking forward to having help around the place." Their last housekeeper left to get married 6 months ago. As if on cue, the front door opened, and a woman emerged onto the porch. Though clearly in her 50s, Mrs. Carson carried herself with the straight-backed dignity of someone who had faced the frontier's hardships without surrendering to them. Her gray-streaked hair was neatly pinned back, and her calico dress, though simple, was immaculately kept. "You must be Hannah," she called as Tucker helped Hannah dismount. "I'm Elizabeth Carson. Welcome to our home." Hannah smoothed her rumpled dress self-consciously. "Thank you for having me, madam." Mrs. Carson came down the steps, taking Hannah's hands in her own. "My dear, your poor face," she said, noticing Hannah's split lip and the bruise forming on her cheek. "That animal." Hannah lowered her eyes, ashamed. "It's nothing, madam." "It's certainly something," Mrs. Carson disagreed firmly. "But it's the last mark that man will ever put on you. Come inside." "You must be exhausted." Tucker handed Hannah her bundle. "Mrs. Carson will get you settled. I need to help the boys with the horses, but I'll check on you later." Hannah nodded, suddenly reluctant to be parted from him after everything they'd been through. "Thank you again, Tucker, for everything." He touched her hand briefly. "You're welcome, Hannah." As Mrs. Carson led her into the house, Hannah felt as though she were stepping into another world. The interior was simply but comfortably furnished, with polished wooden floors, colorful rag rugs, and curtains that brightened the rooms. The smell of fresh baked bread and coffee filled the air. "I've prepared the cabin out back for you," Mrs. Carson explained as she poured Hannah a cup of coffee. "It's small but private. You'll take your meals with us in the house, and we'll work out your duties once you've had some rest." Hannah wrapped her hands around the warm cup, overwhelmed by the kindness being shown to her. "I don't know how to thank you." "There's no need," Mrs. Carson assured her. "Any decent person would have done the same given the chance." She studied Hannah's face. "Tucker tells me you've been working since you were 14. Hannah nodded. "My father's farm failed in the drought of '81. He borrowed money to save it, using my labor as collateral. When he still couldn't make it work, Virgil bought the debt." She stared into her coffee. "My parents died of fever the following winter. My younger siblings went to live with an aunt back east. I've been sending what little money I could save to help support them." Mrs. Carson's eyes filled with compassion. "And how old are you now, my dear?" 23, madam." "All those years," Mrs. Carson murmured. "Well, that's over now. Here, you'll be paid fair wages for fair work with time to rest and a place of your own." Hannah felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "Thank you, madam." Mrs. Carson patted her hand. "Now, finish your coffee and I'll show you to your cabin. You need sleep before anything else." The cabin was indeed small, just one room with a bed, a table and chair, a chest of drawers, and a small stove for heat in the winter. But to Hannah, accustomed to sharing a cramped attic room with two other girls, it was palatial. Best of all, it had a door with a lock that only she controlled. "Rest as long as you need," Mrs. Carson told her. "We'll talk more when you wake." Left alone, Hannah unpacked her few belongings, placing her mother's cross on the wall above the bed. She washed her face and hands in the basin of water Mrs. Carson had provided, then lay down on the clean, soft bed. Despite her racing thoughts about all that had happened, exhaustion claimed her almost immediately, and she fell into the deepest sleep she'd known in years. When Hannah awoke, the sun was already low in the western sky. She'd slept the entire day away. Disoriented, she sat up quickly before remembering where she was not in the saloon but in her own cabin at the Carson Ranch. A knock at the door startled her. "Hannah, are you awake?" Tucker's voice called softly. Hannah hurriedly smoothed her hair and straightened her rumpled dress before opening the door. Tucker stood outside, holding a covered plate. "Mrs. Carson thought you might be hungry," he said, offering the plate. "You slept through dinner." "Thank you," Hannah said, suddenly aware of her empty stomach. Would you like to come in?" "Or is that improper?" Tucker smiled. "I think we can leave the door open and satisfy propriety." He followed her inside, setting the plate on the small table while Hannah lit a lamp against the gathering dusk. When she uncovered the plate, she found roast chicken, potatoes, and fresh bread, simple fare but a feast compared to what she was accustomed to. "Mrs. Carson's cooking is the best in the county," Tucker said as Hannah sat down to eat. "One of many reasons I was happy to work for Mr. Carson." Hannah took a bite of chicken, closing her eyes briefly at the delicious flavor. "Everything here seems too good to be true. I keep expecting to wake up." Tucker sat across from her, his expression serious. "It's real, Hannah, but I should warn you that your troubles aren't completely over. Virgil came looking for you this afternoon." Hannah's fork clattered against the plate. "He was here," Tucker nodded, "with Judge Foster and Sheriff Williams. They demanded your return, claiming breach of contract." Fear clutched at Hannah's heart. "What happened?" Mr. Carson was ready for them. "Had your new contract witnessed and notarized this morning." and he reminded the judge that a federal marshal is arriving tomorrow specifically to investigate claims of illegal labor practices. "And that worked?" Hannah asked, hardly daring to hope. "For now," Tucker said carefully. The judge backed down, especially when Carson mentioned his connections in the state legislature. But Virgil was furious. He made threats. Hannah set down her fork, her appetite gone. "I've brought trouble to your employer's doorstep." "You've done nothing wrong," Tucker said firmly. Carson knew what he was getting into. He hates men like Virgil and foster men who abuse power and exploit others. He leaned forward. "And so do I." Hannah studied his face, still confused by his involvement. "Why did you help me, Tucker? Truly?" He was silent for a moment, considering. "My mother was in a similar situation once," he finally said. "Before she met my father, she was indentured to a family in Missouri who treated her like property. My father helped her escape and they fell in love." His eyes met Hannah's. "When I saw how Virgil treated you, saw your hands so roughened by work, yet you still carried yourself with dignity, I couldn't look away." Hannah glanced down at her hands, the calluses and scars visible in the lamplight. Self-consciously, she tucked them into her lap. Not exactly a lady's hands. Tucker reached across the table, gently drawing her hands back into view. "May I?" After a hesitant moment, Hannah nodded. Tucker turned her hands palm up, his thumbs tracing the hard ridges of callus, the network of tiny scars from cuts and burns. "These hands tell a story," he said softly. "Of strength, resilience, years of hard work and sacrifice." His eyes met hers. "They're beautiful, Hannah." Something warm unfurled in Hannah's chest at his words. No one had ever looked at her work-worn hands and seen beauty. No one had ever looked at her, really looked, and seen anything worth valuing. "You hardly know me," she whispered. Tucker's fingers continued their gentle exploration of her hands. "I'd like to change that, if you'll let me." Hannah knew she should pull away, protect herself from hoping for things beyond her reach. But Tucker's touch was so gentle, his eyes so sincere, that she found herself nodding. "I'd like that too," she admitted quietly. Tucker smiled, releasing her hands with obvious reluctance. "Then I'll start by letting you finish your dinner before Mrs. Carson scolds me for keeping you from eating." As promised, the federal marshal arrived the following day. Marshal Daniel Harker was a tall, stern-faced man with a reputation for incorruptibility. He spent the morning closeted with Mr. Carson, reviewing Hannah's original contract with Virgil and taking her statement about the conditions at the saloon. "This isn't the first complaint I've heard about Judge Foster's arrangements," Harker told Hannah. "But it's the first time I've had a witness willing to testify." Hannah felt sick at the thought. "Testify in court," Harker nodded, "if necessary. We need to stop men like Virgil and Foster from continuing these practices." "They're powerful men," Hannah said nervously, "with friends." "So am I," Harker replied evenly, "with even more powerful friends in Washington. Will you help me, Miss Zimmerman?" Hannah looked down at her hands, then at Tucker, who stood quietly by the door. His encouraging nod gave her the courage she needed. "Yes," she told Harker, "I'll help." The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Hannah settled into her duties at the Carson Ranch, helping Mrs. Carson with cooking, cleaning, and tending the kitchen garden. The work was still demanding, but entirely different from her life at the saloon. She had regular hours, proper meals, and time to rest. Mrs. Carson proved to be a kind employer who treated Hannah more like a daughter than a servant, teaching her to bake and sew, and taking genuine interest in her well-being. Tucker, true to his word, made time to see Hannah nearly every day. Sometimes he'd join her for a few minutes as she hung laundry, telling her about his day breaking horses or mending fences. Other times, with Mrs. Carson's smiling approval, he'd escort Hannah on short walks around the ranch in the evenings. On Sundays, after church, they'd sit together beneath a sprawling oak tree near the creek, talking for hours. Hannah learned that Tucker was 30, had grown up on a ranch in Colorado, and had fought briefly in the closing days of the war despite being barely 18. He'd spent the years since working on ranches throughout the West, sending money home to his aging parents until they passed within months of each other 3 years ago. "I've been a bit rootless since then," he admitted. "No real home, just moving from job to job. Do you ever think of settling?" Hannah asked, watching a hawk circle lazily overhead. Tucker glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. "I've been thinking about it more lately." Hannah felt her cheeks warm under his gaze and changed the subject. "Have you heard anything from Marshall Harker?" Tucker nodded. "He's building his case. Several other girls have come forward with similar stories about Virgil's contracts. And Judge Foster, under investigation by the circuit court, seems he's been taking bribes to enforce these illegal contracts for years." Hannah shook her head in wonder. "I never thought I'd see the day." "Justice comes eventually," Tucker said, "even if it takes longer than it should." As July turned to August, the heat became almost unbearable. The cattle grew listless, seeking shade wherever they could find it, and the ranch hands worked in the cooler hours of early morning and evening, resting during the worst heat of the day. Hannah was returning from gathering eggs one particularly scorching morning when she spotted Tucker by the corral, working with a spirited bay mare. She paused to watch, admiring the easy way he moved with the horse, speaking softly and handling the animal with gentle firmness. His shirt clung to his back, damp with sweat, as he patiently led the mare through the paces of accepting a saddle. As if sensing her presence, Tucker looked up, a smile breaking across his face when he spotted her. He secured the mare to a post and walked over, pushing his hat back on his head. "Morning, Miss Zimmerman," he greeted her, his eyes warm. "Mr. Sutton," she replied with a small smile. "That's a beautiful horse." "She is," Tucker agreed, glancing back at the mare, "but strong-willed. Reminds me of someone I know." Hannah raised an eyebrow. "I'm not sure whether to be flattered or offended," Tucker laughed. "Definitely meant as a compliment. Spirit is a valuable quality." They stood in companionable silence for a moment until Hannah remembered her errand. "I should get these eggs to Mrs. Carson." "Before you go," Tucker said, suddenly looking a bit nervous, "I wanted to ask you something. Mr. and Mrs. Carson are hosting a dinner tomorrow night for some of the neighboring ranchers. There'll be music and dancing afterward." Hannah nodded. "Yes, Mrs. Carson mentioned I'd be helping serve." "Actually," Tucker said, "I was hoping you might agree to attend, as my guest, not to work." Hannah stared at him in surprise. "As your guest, but I'm just the housekeeper." "You're a great deal more than that," Tucker said quietly, "to me at least." Heat that had nothing to do with the August sun rushed to Hannah's cheeks. "I don't have anything suitable to wear to such an event." "Mrs. Carson thought you might say that," Tucker grinned. "She mentioned having a dress that might fit you with some alterations." Hannah hesitated, torn between desire and fear. To attend a social gathering as Tucker's companion would send a clear message about their relationship, a message she wasn't sure she was ready to acknowledge, let alone broadcast to others. "People will talk," she said finally. "Let them," Tucker replied simply. "I'm not ashamed to be seen with you, Hannah. I'm proud." The sincerity in his voice broke through her last reservations. "Then yes," she said softly, "I'd be honored to attend with you." Tucker's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "I'll come for you at 7 tomorrow evening." As Hannah continued to the house with her basket of eggs, her heart felt lighter than it had in years. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future beyond mere survival, a future that might include Tucker Sutton, Mrs. Carson was delighted when Hannah told her of Tucker's invitation. "I was hoping he'd ask you," she confessed, eyes twinkling. "He's been sweet on you since the day you arrived." "Mrs. Carson?" Hannah protested, embarrassed. "Oh, don't look so shocked," Mrs. Carson laughed. "I have eyes in my head. Now, let's see about that dress." The dress in question was a lovely creation of deep blue silk that Mrs. Carson had worn years ago. "My dancing days are largely behind me," she said as she held it up to Hannah's figure. "But with your slim build, we can take it in here, and it should fit beautifully." They spent the afternoon altering the dress, Hannah's fingers working deftly with needle and thread as Mrs. Carson supervised. By evening, they had transformed the garment into something that fit Hannah's frame perfectly, highlighting her slender waist and adding a touch of femininity that her plain work dresses never allowed. "You look beautiful," Mrs. Carson said softly as Hannah tried on the completed dress. "I have some jet beads that would look lovely in your hair, if you'd like." Hannah stared at her reflection in Mrs. Carson's mirror, hardly recognizing the woman who looked back at her. The dress's deep blue color brought out the gold flecks in her hazel eyes, and the cut accentuated curves usually hidden beneath shapeless work clothes. "I don't know what to say," Hannah whispered. "Thank you seems insufficient." Mrs. Carson squeezed her shoulder. "Your happiness is thanks enough, my dear. Now let's hang this up for tomorrow. A proper night's rest will ensure you look your best." The next evening, Hannah stood nervously in her cabin, putting the finishing touches on her appearance. Mrs. Carson had helped her arrange her hair, sweeping it up with the promised jet combs and allowing a few soft curls to frame her face. The bruise on her cheek had faded to a faint yellowish mark that could barely be seen in the lamplight. At precisely 7, a knock came at her door. Hannah took a deep breath, smoothed the silk dress one last time, and opened the door. Tucker stood outside, and for a moment they simply stared at each other. He was dressed in a crisp white shirt, black vest, and clean trousers, his hair neatly combed and his face freshly shaven. He looked so handsome that Hannah felt her breath catch. "Hannah," he finally managed, his voice husky, "you look, I don't have the words." "Thank you," she said softly. "Mrs. Carson helped me with the dress." Tucker offered his arm. "Shall we?" The main house was already filled with guests when they arrived, ranchers and their wives from neighboring properties, all curious to meet the woman Tucker Sutton was escorting. Hannah felt their eyes on her as Tucker led her through the crowd, making introductions. "Miss Zimmerman recently joined the Carson household," was all Tucker said by way of explanation for her presence, offering no details about her previous employment. Hannah was grateful for his discretion. Dinner was served at a long table in the dining room, with Hannah seated beside Tucker near the center. She was initially terrified of using the wrong fork or committing some social blunder that would embarrass him. But Tucker discreetly guided her through the meal, his easy conversation helping her relax. After dinner, the furniture was moved aside in the large front room, and one of the ranch hands produced a fiddle. Another had a harmonica, and soon lively music filled the air. Couples began to dance, and Tucker turned to Hannah with a question in his eyes. "I don't really know how," she admitted quietly. "I'll teach you," he promised, leading her to the edge of the makeshift dance floor. "It's simple, just follow my lead." His hand at her waist was warm and steady as he guided her through the steps of a simple waltz. Hannah concentrated on not stepping on his toes, gradually relaxing into the rhythm of the music and the security of Tucker's arms. "You're a natural," he told her as they turned around the room. Hannah laughed. "Now you're just being kind." "Not at all," he insisted. "You move gracefully. As they danced, Hannah became aware of whispers and glances from some of the other guests. She caught fragments of conversation, saloon girl and Virgil's establishment, and her heart sank. Despite Tucker's discretion, it seemed her past was known. Tucker must have sensed her discomfort because he slowed their pace. "What's wrong?" "They know who I am," Hannah whispered. "Where I came from." Tucker's jaw tightened as he glanced around the room, noting the whispers. "Does it matter?" "It might to you," Hannah said. "Your reputation is my own concern," Tucker finished firmly. "And I've never cared much for gossip." Before Hannah could respond, the music changed to a livelier tune, and Tucker spun her into a faster dance that left no breath for conversation. By the time the song ended, they were both laughing, and Hannah had forgotten her concerns in the simple joy of moving to music with a man who looked at her as though she were precious. Later, as the evening cooled, Tucker suggested they step outside for some air. The porch was deserted, everyone else still inside enjoying the music and refreshments. They stood side by side at the railing, looking out at the star-filled Texas sky. "Are you enjoying yourself?" Tucker asked. Hannah nodded. "More than I can say. Thank you for inviting me." "Thank you for coming," he replied. "I've wanted to dance with you since the first time I saw you." Hannah laughed softly. "Even when I was covered in dust behind the saloon, especially then," Tucker said, his voice suddenly serious. "You looked so tired, yet so determined. I admired your strength immediately." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. The moonlight silvered his features, highlighting the earnestness in his expression. "Hannah," he began, "I know we've only known each other a short while, but..." A commotion from the road interrupted him, the sound of horses approaching at a gallop. Tucker tensed, moving instinctively to place himself between Hannah and whatever was coming. 3 riders thundered into the yard, pulling their lathered horses to a stop in a cloud of dust. Even in the dim light, Hannah recognized Virgil's bulky form at the lead, with Sheriff Williams and another man she didn't know flanking him. "Where is she?" Virgil's voice boomed across the yard. "Where's my property?" Inside, the music stopped abruptly. Mr. Carson appeared in the doorway behind them, a rifle in his hands. "You're trespassing, Virgil," Carson called calmly. "Get off my land." Virgil dismounted, swaying slightly. He'd been drinking. "Not until I get what's mine." "That girl has a contract." Hannah shrank against Tucker, who put a protective arm around her shoulders. "Stay behind me," he murmured. More people spilled out onto the porch, the party guests watching the confrontation with a mixture of curiosity and alarm. "Mrs." Carson moved to Hannah's side, taking her arm supportively. "Her contract has been legally terminated," Carson said, stepping off the porch with his rifle. "Marshal Harker confirmed it himself. You have no claim on her." Virgil spat on the ground. "That federal bastard has no jurisdiction over legal contracts in Texas." "He does when those contracts violate federal law," came a new voice as Marshal Harker emerged from the shadows near the barn. He must have arrived unnoticed during the party. Virgil's face contorted with rage. "This is none of your business, Marshal. Indentured servitude is very much my business," Harker replied evenly. "As is obstruction of justice, which is what you're doing right now." Sheriff Williams, looking increasingly uncomfortable, edged his horse away from Virgil. "Maybe we should go back to town, Virgil. Talk to Judge Foster in the morning." "Foster can't help you anymore," Harker informed them. "He's been suspended pending investigation. A circuit judge is reviewing all his cases." This news clearly caught Virgil off guard. His face paled visibly even in the moonlight. "You're lying." "I'm afraid not," Harker said. "Now, I suggest you leave peacefully before I add trespassing and attempted kidnapping to the charges already being prepared against you." For a tense moment, Hannah thought Virgil might reach for his gun. His hand hovered near his holster, his bloodshot eyes wild with fury and desperation. But Sheriff Williams finally dismounted and placed a restraining hand on his arm. "It's over, Virgil," Williams said quietly. "Don't make it worse." The fight seemed to drain out of Virgil all at once. He glared at Hannah with naked hatred. "This isn't finished," he snarled. "You'll regret crossing me." Tucker stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. "Threaten her again and you'll regret it first." Harker moved between them. "That's enough. Virgil, you and your men need to leave. Now." With a final venomous look, Virgil allowed Williams to lead him back to his horse. The three riders turned and rode away, kicking up dust in the moonlight. Hannah released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, her legs suddenly so weak that she had to grip the porch railing for support. Tucker was immediately at her side, his arm steady around her waist. "Are you all right?" he asked, his face tight with concern. Hannah nodded, though she felt anything but all right. The evening that had been so magical was now tainted by Virgil's venom. Mr. Carson approached Marshal Harker. "You picked a good time to arrive." "Got word Virgil was planning something," Harker explained. "Didn't expect him to be foolish enough to come here directly." He looked at Hannah. "You're safe, Miss Zimmerman, and you'll remain that way, I promise you that." The party guests were murmuring among themselves, some already calling for their carriages, the festive mood thoroughly broken. Mrs. Carson, ever the gracious hostess, began thanking people for coming, making light of the interruption as best she could. Tucker led Hannah to a quiet corner of the porch. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I wanted tonight to be perfect for you." Hannah managed a small smile. "It was perfect, the parts that mattered." She reached up to touch his face gently. "Thank you for protecting me, again." Tucker turned his head to press a kiss to her palm. "I'll always protect you, Hannah, if you'll let me." The tenderness in his voice made her eyes fill with tears. "I'm afraid," she confessed. "Virgil isn't a man who forgives or forgets." "He can't hurt you anymore," Tucker assured her. "Harker will see to that." But even as he spoke the words, Hannah saw doubt flicker in his eyes. They both knew men like Virgil had ways of exacting revenge that the law couldn't always prevent. As the last guests departed and the household settled for the night, Hannah changed out of her beautiful blue dress with a heavy heart. The evening had shown her a glimpse of what life could be, a life with music and laughter, and Tucker's steady presence at her side. But Virgil's appearance had reminded her that her past wasn't so easily left behind. She was hanging the dress carefully in the small wardrobe when a soft knock came at her door. Opening it, she found Tucker standing outside, still in his vest and shirt sleeves. "I couldn't sleep," he said simply. "Needed to make sure you were all right." Hannah hesitated, then stepped back to let him in, leaving the door partially open for propriety's sake. Tucker entered, his expression troubled. "I've been thinking," he said, pacing the small space of her cabin. "You're not safe here, not as long as Virgil is free and angry." Hannah sank onto the edge of her bed. "Where would I be safe? He has connections all over the county." Tucker stopped pacing and knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "Come with me to Colorado," he said urgently. "My parents' ranch is still there, worked by a foreman until I decide what to do with it. We could go there, start fresh." Hannah stared at him, stunned by the suggestion. "Colorado, but your job here." "Carson would understand," Tucker said, "and I've been thinking about settling down anyway." He squeezed her hands gently. "Hannah, I know this is sudden, but the truth is, I've been falling in love with you since the moment I saw you. Tonight, watching you laugh and dance, seeing you finally happy. I knew I wanted to spend the rest of my life making you smile that way." Hannah's heart seemed to stop, then race forward at his words. "Tucker, I'm not asking for an answer about us right now," he hurried on. "Just come with me to Colorado where you'll be safe. Give me the chance to court you properly, away from Virgil's shadow." His eyes searched hers earnestly. "Please." Hannah looked down at their joined hands, his strong and calloused from ranch work, hers rough from years of labor. Hands that told the stories of their lives. "When would we leave?" she asked softly. Relief washed over Tucker's face. "As soon as possible." "Tomorrow, if Marshal Harker thinks it's best." Hannah nodded slowly. "I'll need to write to my siblings, let them know where to reach me." Tucker broke into a smile so bright it almost hurt to look at him. "Is that a yes?" "It's a yes to Colorado," Hannah clarified, though her heart was already racing ahead to other possibilities. "The rest, we'll see." Tucker raised her hands to his lips, kissing first one and then the other, his touch reverent. "That's all I ask for now." The next morning, Tucker spoke with Mr. Carson while Hannah nervously packed her few belongings. To her surprise and relief, the Carsons not only understood their decision to leave but insisted on helping. Mrs. Carson packed a hamper of food for their journey and pressed a small bundle into Hannah's hands. "Some fabric and sewing supplies," she explained, "to keep you occupied on the journey. And this," she handed Hannah an envelope, "your wages plus a little extra to start your new life." Hannah's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done." Mrs. Carson embraced her warmly. "You can thank me by being happy, my dear, and perhaps writing occasionally to let an old woman know how you're faring." Marshal Harker arrived mid-morning to discuss their plans. "It's a wise decision," he agreed when Tucker explained their intention to leave for Colorado. "Virgil's the type to nurse a grudge. Distance is your best protection for now." "For now?" Hannah asked anxiously. Harker's expression was grave. "I'll do everything in my power to see him prosecuted, Miss Zimmerman, but these cases take time and the law, well, it doesn't always move as swiftly or decisively as we might wish." "All the more reason to leave today," Tucker said firmly. They departed just after noon, traveling in a small wagon packed with their necessities and a few supplies provided by the Carsons. Mr. Carson insisted on sending 2 of his ranch hands with them as far as the county line, a precaution that Hannah found both reassuring and alarming. The reality of their situation, that they were essentially fleeing, weighed heavily on her as they left the safety of the ranch behind. The journey to Colorado would take nearly 2 weeks, following trails that wound through Texas and into the Colorado Territory. They traveled at a steady pace, stopping at small towns and way stations when possible, camping under the stars when no other shelter was available. To Hannah's surprise, she found herself enjoying the journey despite its hardships. There was a freedom in the open spaces that she'd never known in her years of confinement, first on her father's failing farm and then in Virgil's saloon. Each day brought new sights: rolling hills giving way to rugged landscapes, rivers cutting through rocky terrain, sunsets that painted the sky in colors she'd never imagined. And each evening brought her closer to Tucker. Sitting beside campfires, sharing simple meals, talking of their hopes and memories, they built a connection that deepened with each passing day. Tucker was unfailingly respectful, always ensuring Hannah had privacy and comfort as much as their circumstances allowed. But she caught the longing in his eyes when he looked at her, a longing that increasingly mirrored her own feelings. 6 days into their journey, they stopped for the night near a small stream, making camp in a grove of cottonwood trees. After a simple dinner of beans and cornbread, they sat side by side watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. "Tell me about your home," Hannah said, breaking a comfortable silence. "The ranch in Colorado." Tucker smiled, the firelight playing across his features. "It's nothing grand, but it's good land. About 500 acres nestled in a valley with mountains visible to the west. The house is solid. My father built it with his own hands when he brought my mother there as a bride." "What was she like, your mother?" Hannah asked, curious about the woman whose situation had so reminded Tucker of her own. "Strong," Tucker said immediately. "Like you. She'd been indentured to a family in St. Louis who worked her nearly to death. My father was passing through, stopped to water his horses, and saw her being struck by the mistress of the house." His jaw tightened at the memory. He intervened, bought out her contract on the spot, and offered her a choice: she could go wherever she wished, or work for him for fair wages. "She chose to go with him," Hannah guessed. Tucker nodded. Said later she knew the moment he stood up for her that he was a man worth following. They married 6 months later. He glanced at Hannah. "She always said her hands told the story of her life, rough from years of hard work, but gentle enough to raise a child with love." Hannah looked down at her own hands, thinking of the parallel. "You must miss them both very much." "I do," Tucker admitted, "but being with you, it's like having a piece of them back, their story continuing." The emotion in his voice made Hannah's heart ache with tenderness. She reached for his hand, twining her fingers with his. "Thank you for sharing that with me." Tucker turned to face her, the firelight casting his features in gold and shadow. "Hannah," he said softly, "I know I said I'd court you properly once we reached Colorado, but I find myself growing more impatient with each passing day." Hannah's pulse quickened. "Impatient?" "To tell you how I feel," he clarified. "To ask if there's any chance you might someday return those feelings." Hannah looked into his earnest face and knew with sudden clarity that what she felt for this man had grown far beyond gratitude or simple affection. Somewhere between Brownsville and this quiet campsite, between his first act of kindness at the well and his unwavering protection through every challenge, she had fallen deeply in love with Tucker Sutton. "I already do," she whispered. Tucker's eyes widened, hope dawning in their depths. "You do?" Hannah nodded, suddenly shy despite her certainty. "I love you, Tucker. I think I started falling the moment you held my hands and called them beautiful." With exquisite gentleness, Tucker cupped her face in his hands. "May I kiss you, Hannah?" At her nod, he leaned forward, pressing his lips to hers in a kiss so tender it brought tears to her eyes. His hands slid from her face to her shoulders, drawing her closer as the kiss deepened, becoming something more urgent, more passionate. Hannah wound her arms around his neck, lost in the sensation of being held, being wanted, being loved. When they finally parted, both breathless, Tucker rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he murmured. "More than I thought possible." They remained by the fire late into the night, talking of the future, sharing kisses and dreams until the embers burned low. Only then did Tucker reluctantly escort Hannah to her small tent, pressing a final kiss to her hand, before retiring to his own bedroll beneath the stars. The remainder of their journey passed in a haze of happiness for Hannah. The uncertainty of what awaited them in Colorado was overshadowed by the joy of each day spent in Tucker's company, each night ending with increasingly passionate kisses and whispered promises. On the 12th day, as the sun was beginning its westward descent, Tucker pointed to a distant line of mountains. "There," he said, his voice tight with emotion. "Home." Hannah followed his gaze, taking in the breathtaking landscape. Rolling grasslands stretched before them, rising gradually toward foothills that gave way to majestic mountains. Nestled in a valley about 2 miles ahead, she could make out the outline of buildings: a house, a barn, several smaller structures clustered together. "It's beautiful," she breathed. Tucker squeezed her hand. "It will be even more beautiful with you in it." As they drew closer, Hannah saw that the ranch house was larger than she'd expected, a sturdy 2-story structure built of timber and stone, with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Smoke rose from the chimney, and a man emerged from the barn as their wagon approached. "That's Jim Morgan," Tucker explained. "The foreman who's been looking after the place. I sent word we were coming when we reached the last town." Morgan greeted them warmly, helping Tucker with the wagon while eyeing Hannah with undisguised curiosity. "Good to have you back, Tucker," he said. "And pleased to meet you, Miss Zimmerman. Tucker's letter mentioned you'd be joining him." Hannah wondered exactly what Tucker had written, but Morgan's respectful manner put her at ease. He helped carry her things into the house, where Hannah discovered that her room had been prepared for her clean, comfortable, and distinctly feminine, with fresh curtains at the windows and flowers in a vase on the dresser. "My wife came by yesterday to ready the place," Morgan explained. "Hope everything's to your liking." "It's perfect," Hannah assured him. "Please thank Mrs. Morgan for me." Left alone to settle in, Hannah stood in the center of the room, overwhelmed by the sudden transition. After weeks of travel, of constant movement and uncertainty, the solid walls and comfortable furnishings seemed almost unreal. This was to be her home, perhaps temporarily, perhaps forever, depending on what the future held for her and Tucker. A soft knock at the door roused her from her thoughts. Tucker stood in the doorway, his expression a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "Is everything all right?" he asked. "If anything's not to your liking, we can change it." Hannah smiled, touched by his concern. "Everything is wonderful. I was just taking it all in." Tucker stepped into the room, closing the distance between them. "I know it's been a lot leaving Texas, the long journey, arriving here. If you need time—" Hannah silenced him by placing her fingers gently against his lips. "What I need," she said softly, "is for you to stop worrying that I might change my mind." Relief washed over his features. He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her fingers. "Can you blame me? Sometimes I wake up afraid this has all been a dream, that I'll find myself back in Brownsville, watching you from a distance, unable to tell you how I feel." Hannah's heart swelled with tenderness. "This is real, Tucker. I'm here and I love you." He gathered her into his arms then, holding her as if she were something precious, something he feared might slip away. "Stay with me," he whispered against her hair. "Not just here at the ranch, but forever. Be my wife." Hannah pulled back slightly to look into his face, seeing nothing but sincerity and love in his eyes. "Are you certain? My past is part of what made you the woman I love," Tucker finished. "Strong, resilient, compassionate despite everything you've endured." He took her hands in his, turning them palm up as he had that first night in her cabin. "These hands tell your story, Hannah, a story of courage and perseverance. I love every chapter of it, and I want to write the rest together." Tears filled Hannah's eyes as she looked at their joined hands, hers still rough from years of labor, his strong and steady, offering support, offering a future. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll be your wife." Tucker's face lit with such joy that Hannah felt her heart might burst from happiness. He lifted her off her feet in an exuberant embrace, spinning her around before setting her down and kissing her with a passion that left her breathless. "When?" he asked when they finally parted. "How soon can I make you Mrs. Sutton?" Hannah laughed, giddy with happiness. "How soon can the preacher come from town?" "I'll ride in first thing tomorrow," Tucker promised. "Unless you want a big wedding. We could wait. Invite the Carsons." Hannah shook her head. "All I want is you. A simple ceremony with Jim and his wife as witnesses would be perfect." Tucker kissed her again, gentler this time but no less full of promise. "Then Mrs. Sutton you shall be, as soon as it can be arranged." True to his word, Tucker rode into the nearest town the following morning. He returned by midday with news that the circuit preacher would arrive on Sunday, just 4 days away. Those days passed in a blur of activity as Hannah and Tucker prepared for both the wedding and their life together. Morgan's wife, Ellen, proved to be a godsend, helping Hannah settle into the ranch house and offering friendship along with practical advice about running such a large household. On Sunday morning, Hannah stood in her room, smoothing the skirt of her wedding dress, a simple creation of cream-colored muslin that she and Ellen had worked on together, using the fabric Mrs. Carson had given her. Her hair was arranged simply but elegantly, adorned with wildflowers Ellen had gathered at dawn. A knock at the door announced Ellen's arrival. The older woman entered, her eyes filling with tears at the sight of Hannah. "Oh, my dear, you look beautiful. You think Tucker will think so?" Hannah asked nervously. Ellen laughed. "That man looks at you like you hung the moon and stars. He'll think you're the most beautiful bride in creation." She handed Hannah a small package. "This came yesterday with a rider from Texas. I believe it's from Mrs. Carson." Surprised, Hannah opened the package to find a delicate lace handkerchief with her initials HZ embroidered in one corner, along with a note wishing her happiness on her wedding day. "How thoughtful," Hannah murmured, touched by the gesture. "Ready?" Ellen asked, offering her arm. Hannah took a deep breath and nodded. "Ready." The ceremony took place in the ranch house parlor, where Tucker waited with Jim Morgan and the preacher. When Hannah entered, Tucker's face transformed with such naked adoration that any lingering doubts she might have harbored melted away. This was right. This was where she belonged. The preacher's words were simple and traditional, but Hannah barely heard them, lost in Tucker's gaze as they exchanged vows. When he slipped a ring onto her finger, his mother's, he told her later Hannah felt as though her heart might burst from happiness. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the preacher declared. "You may kiss your bride." Tucker cupped her face in his hands with exquisite tenderness, as if she were made of the finest porcelain, and kissed her with such love that Hannah felt tears spring to her eyes. "Mrs. Sutton," he whispered against her lips as they parted. Hannah smiled up at him, her heart overflowing. "Mr. Sutton." After a celebratory dinner prepared by Ellen, the Morgans and the preacher departed, leaving the newlyweds alone for the first time as husband and wife. As twilight deepened into night, Tucker led Hannah onto the porch, where they stood looking out at the star-filled Colorado sky. "Are you happy?" he asked, his arm around her waist. "More than I ever thought possible," Hannah answered truthfully. Tucker turned her to face him, his expression suddenly serious. "I want to promise you something, Hannah, here on our first night as husband and wife." "What is it?" she asked, laying her hand against his chest. "That I will spend every day of our lives together, ensuring you never regret choosing me," Tucker vowed. "That you will never again know hunger or fear or the feeling that you're alone in this world." Hannah felt tears prick her eyes at the solemnity of his promise. "And I promise to love you with everything I am," she whispered. "To build a home with you that's filled with warmth and happiness. To stand beside you through whatever life brings us." Tucker took her hands in his, raising them to his lips. "These hands," he said softly, kissing the rough knuckles, the calloused palms, "will build that life with me. They're the most beautiful hands I've ever known because they're strong and they're yours." Hannah rose on tiptoe to kiss him, pouring all her love, all her hopes for their future, into that single gesture. As Tucker swept her into his arms to carry her across the threshold into their home, into their new life together, Hannah knew with absolute certainty that her years of hardship had led her exactly where she was meant to be, in the arms of a man who saw beauty in her strength and promise in their shared tomorrow. 5 years later, Hannah stood on the porch of their ranch house, watching as Tucker rode in from the fields, their 3-year-old son Jamie perched proudly in front of him on the saddle. Behind them, 2 ranch hands drove a small herd of cattle toward the north pasture. "Mama," Jamie called excitedly, waving as they approached. "Pa, let me help with the cattle. I can see that," Hannah called back, smiling at her son's exuberance. She shifted the baby in her arms, little Rose, just 6 months old and already showing signs of her father's inquisitive nature. Tucker dismounted with practiced ease, lifting Jamie down before coming up the porch steps to kiss Hannah and chuck Rose under her chin. "How are my girls?" he asked, his eyes warm with love. "We're well," Hannah replied. "Rose finally took a proper nap and I've been going through the accounts. The cattle sales from last month put us ahead of projections." Tucker grinned, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "That business mind of yours is one of the many reasons I married you." Hannah leaned into his embrace, savoring the solid warmth of him. "Oh, and what were the others?" "Your beauty," Tucker said, kissing her forehead. "Your strength," a kiss on her nose. "Your kindness," a kiss on her cheek. "And those amazing hands." He took her free hand in his, pressing his lips to her palm. Hannah laughed softly. "Still finding beauty in my work-worn hands, Mr. Sutton." "Always, Mrs. Sutton," he replied seriously. "They've rocked our children, built our home, and held my heart from the moment I first touched them." Jamie tugged impatiently at Tucker's leg. "Pa, you promised to show me the new foal." "So I did," Tucker agreed, ruffling the boy's hair. "Coming, Hannah." Hannah smiled, adjusting Rose on her hip. "We wouldn't miss it." As they walked toward the barn, a family united by love and strengthened by the challenges they had overcome together, Hannah felt a deep contentment wash over her. The hands that had once known only labor now knew the tender weight of her children, the loving touch of her husband, the satisfaction of work done for herself and those she loved. From the broken promises of her father's debt to the cruelty of Virgil's saloon, from that fateful meeting in a Brownsville alley to this peaceful Colorado ranch, Hannah's journey had been written in the calluses and scars that marked her hands. But Tucker had been right all along. There was beauty in that story, beauty in the strength that had carried her through darkness into light. As Tucker lifted Jamie to see the new foal, his free arm still wrapped protectively around Hannah and the baby, she knew with absolute certainty that her hands had finally found their true purpose, not in servitude, but in love, in creating a home, in building a life with the man who had looked past her rough exterior to see the beauty within. And as Tucker caught her eye over their son's excited chatter, his gaze full of the same love and admiration it had held from the beginning, Hannah knew that their story, like her hands, would only grow more beautiful with each passing year.